Hi folks, I'm JP. Welcome to You Can Cook Anything. Last year, my favorite TV show was The Bear, and I liked it so much that this year, when the second season came out, I convinced my wife to watch it, even though she's not really interested in cooking or restaurants. This video is not about The Bear, but it is about a recipe that figures pretty heavily in the plot of the show. Now, the recipe itself is kind of cobbled together from what you can see on the show and people's knowledge of classic spaghetti recipes. So I think you should consider this version, my version of this recipe, to just be a template for you to start and see how much flavor you can jam into a spaghetti recipe. And one of the variations I've done is to add meatballs. And I hope you try it, and I hope you experiment with it and make your own version. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do for this recipe is to make the aroma oil. I combined olive oil, fresh basil, garlic cloves that have been peeled and smashed, and red pepper flakes, and then I simmer this for a little while on high heat before turning it to low heat. At first you're going to fry this on medium-high heat, but the goal isn't to brown all of these basil leaves and garlic. If you get a little bit of color on them, it's time to turn the heat down. I like to simmer this at low heat after it's been frying for a few minutes and let it go 10 more, 15 more minutes. Then eventually you're going to turn the heat off and let it continue to steep in the oil. You want to time it so that by the time it's done, all of the garlic cloves are soft. If you'd like to simmer it under low heat for longer than that, that works too. You're slow cooking the garlic and the rest of these ingredients in the oil, which you could consider to be a garlic confit. Now, while the infused oil is either still simmering or cooling down and steeping, it's time to start the tomatoes. We're going to begin with some unsalted butter, and I want you to note that the correct ratios are in the recipe. Once the butter is nearly melted, you're going to place the onions, which have been halved, cut side down on the bottom of your pan. You're looking to get a little bit of color on those onions, but you're doing it at the same time that you are browning the butter. You don't want to burn the butter, so be careful. As soon as you see any evidence of the butter burning, it's time to either turn the heat down or put those tomatoes in. Here I'm using 2 cans of whole peeled Italian-style tomatoes. Use your favorite brand. The original recipe calls for San Marzano tomatoes, but obviously this is going to work with any Italian-style tomatoes. Go ahead and simmer these tomatoes and onions for at least 25 minutes. To make the meatballs, I'm going to start by grating half a cup of Parmesan cheese, and then I'm going to line a baking sheet with parchment paper so that I have a place to put the meatballs as I form them. The spices you see here are oregano, dried parsley, I would have used fresh if I'd had it, garlic powder, salt, and pepper. I add some panko breadcrumbs to a bowl, and to that I add a large egg, all of my spices and cheese, and some milk. With your impeccably clean hands, as Julia Child would say, go ahead and mix those together. Next, add a pound of hamburger and a quarter pound of ground pork. I didn't have ground pork, so I'm using mild Italian sausage. The mild Italian sausage is definitely going to change the flavor profile of these meatballs. It's what I had. You decide what you like to do. Give that a good mix by hand. Now form that mixture into 1.5-inch diameter meatballs. As I was doing this, it occurred to me the meatballs are all just a little bit different. Some are a little larger, some are a little smaller. It's no problem to make adjustments when you're done to make sure that they are more uniform in size. In these go to a 400-degree preheated oven to cook for approximately 25 minutes. In the last 5 minutes, I like to keep them under a broiler so that the outsides brown just a little bit more for added flavor. Now that my infused oil is cool to the touch, it's time for me to decide what to do with it. Now, some people say just strain off the oil and discard the elements that flavored it, but to be honest, I really think that the garlic and the basil still have a little bit of flavor in them. So what I do is I remove the stem portions of the basil. They've already given up all the flavor that they will, and the texture is not good for your sauce. So pick through and remove the stems And at some point, you're going to make a decision about how to use this oil. Now, the oil itself has lots of flavor in it. It can be used in this recipe. It can be used for the next time that you make spaghetti. What I opted to do here was only use a small amount of the oil and use a chef's knife to chop the basil and the garlic until it's extremely fine. You could use a food processor, but when I think it won't make a difference, I'd rather dirty a knife than a food processor because knives are easier to clean. I've tried this before with a stick blender and there's just not enough liquid to make it easy, so I'm just going to use my chef's knife. After the sauce has been cooking for about 25 minutes, and certainly you can let it go for much longer than that, it's time to remove the halved onions. And with the onions removed, add in your pureed garlic, basil, and red pepper flakes. At this point in the process, it's a lot easier to break up the whole peeled tomatoes since they've been cooking for a bit. I like to use tongs rather than pureeing the tomatoes, just squeezing them to break them up. I like the heterogeneity of the sauce when you can still tell it was made from real tomatoes. After having been broiled for about 5 minutes, these meatballs are done and brown and ready to go into a pot with some of our sauce. Now the sauce that I've got remaining in the pot is just about what I like to have for a pound of spaghetti. So I'm boiling a pound of spaghetti in as little salt water as I could get away with. I keep an electric kettle handy to make more water in case it gets too low, and I just monitor it while it's cooking. I use very little water because I want to use the salty starch water as a slight thickening agent for my sauce. Boil your spaghetti until it is al dente or to the tooth. You can only tell when it's gotten there by checking it. When it's still got a little bit of chewiness left to it, but is fully cooked through, it's time to add all of your spaghetti to the sauce pot. Then add a splash of the starchy water, depending on how much of the liquid in the sauce has cooked off. You don't want to thin it too much. Since we haven't really seasoned the sauce with salt, the salt water from cooking the pasta will add that seasoning. Of course, before you serve, you're going to want to adjust this seasoning to your taste. If you don't have a pasta fork for plating, you can use a barbecue fork like I'm using and spin it around all fancy-like in your ladle. I've found that 2 ladles full of spaghetti is enough of a serving for me, but when people look at the photographs online, they always think that I'm on a diet. I guarantee for most people, eating this meal will not feel like you're on a diet, especially if you plop 2 meatballs down beside your little stack of pasta. The only thing left to do with this now is to add some freshly grated cheese. So I love the way that this recipe turned out. It's got a lot of flavor. I will definitely be making this on a regular basis, but I do have a couple of notes for myself. One is, I'm not sure that it needs quite as much butter as what you see me use in the video. So next time I do this, I probably will reduce the butter a little bit, and I will probably brown the cut side of the onions just in a small amount of oil before I add the butter. And then I'll continue to brown the butter because the amount of time it takes to brown the outside of an onion is longer than the amount of time it takes to brown butter. And I want both of those things to happen. Other than that, I think this is a great recipe and I really think you should give it a try. Well, until next time, I'm JP. Remember what Bob and I always say, you can cook anything.